All right, let's jump right in. When most of us picture the Great Wall of China today, we usually imagine thousands of tourists smiling for photos on this beautiful winding monument, right? Well, let's get one thing straight right off the bat in this explainer. This wall, it was not built to look beautiful. It definitely wasn't created for sightseeing. In fact, this mind-boggling structure was born entirely out of one single overpowering emotion: absolute terror. It was driven by a constant threatened invasion, wild border insecurity, and a danger that just never seemed to vanish.
So it really forces us to ask the core question: why build an impossible wall in the first place? I mean, really, just imagine it for a second. What could possibly drive an ancient empire to force millions of people into such a staggering, desperate, and honestly seemingly impossible project, pushing human beings to build across roaring rivers, barren deserts, and towering mountain peaks? Well, the answer lies in the sheer, unimaginable scale of their desperation.
And man, just look at the scale of what that desperation produced. 21,196. That is the number of kilometers this massive structure stretches across the Earth. To put that into perspective, it's undoubtedly one of the largest man-made constructions on the planet. But that massive, jaw-dropping number hides a deeply mysterious and often very dark history that goes way beyond just the stones and bricks.
Which brings us to our first section: born from absolute fear.
So picture this. Nearly 3,000 years ago, early Chinese dynasties were plagued by these constant, unpredictable, and devastating raids. Emperors changed, dynasties rose and fell, but this underlying anxiety, it never disappeared. At literally any moment, a flood of hostile forces could just emerge from a horizon. And the contrast here perfectly illustrates exactly why those raids were happening. On one side, you've got the Yellow River settlers. These were peaceful, settled farmers living in villages and cities, growing crops, living organized lives. But then, on the other side, up in the north, where fertile land was extremely limited, you had the northern nomadic tribes. Now, these nomadic horsemen didn't depend on farming at all. They survived through livestock and herding. So to stay alive, they often really had no choice but to raid the settled lands, destroying fields, stealing grain, and then vanishing back into the endless grasslands just as quickly as they appeared.
Moving right along to Section 2, unifying the stone dragon.
For centuries, rulers tried to stop these lightning-fast raids with scattered mud walls, isolated forts, wooden fences, but nothing really worked. Then, around 223 BC, all that scattered fear became a unified strategy. China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, rose to power with a singular, massive vision. He looked north, saw a broken, fragmented frontier filled with weak spots, and basically decided those cracks were going to disappear. He ordered the total unification of the defenses. And that vision transformed the wall from a scattered effort into almost a living organism, a gigantic dragon made of stone, earth, bricks, and watchtowers. This stone dragon literally climbed mountain peaks and crossed valleys, physically binding a totally fractured empire together under one massive, continuous line of defense. But as you might guess, bringing this dragon to life required a horrific toll.
And that leads us into Section 3, the world's largest graveyard.
See, creating this dragon forced both humans and nature to bend. This wasn't just a massive construction project. It was a scene of unparalleled human tragedy that spanned nearly 2,000 years of continuous building, destruction, and rebuilding. And it resulted in what is heavily considered to be the world's largest graveyard. We are talking about a staggering 2 million people who worked on this wall. Though honestly, the word worked is a massive understatement. These were forced laborers. The workforce was a huge blend of farmers dragged directly from their fields, prisoners sentenced to hard labor, soldiers repurposed from fighting to hauling stone, and craftsmen who were basically expected to perform miracles. They were subjected to brutal, back-breaking 16 to 18-hour workdays. Imagine hauling heavy baskets of stone by hand, forming human chains up dangerous steep slopes, enduring freezing winter winds and scorching summer heat, all while not even receiving enough food to survive.
Which brings us to this absolutely grim number: 500,000. It's estimated that 500,000 laborers died building this wall. They died from disease, pure exhaustion, or simply falling into deep ravines. And because they were buried right near the construction sites, the Great Wall quite literally became a graveyard. It's really no wonder that many people in ancient China viewed the wall as a cursed project, something that ruined kingdoms and absolutely broke families.
Now, let's take a look at Section 4, engineering an impossible wall.
Despite the immense human tragedy here, we absolutely have to recognize the astonishing ancient ingenuity at play.
I mean, how on earth do you engineer an impossible wall thousands of years before modern machinery, cranes, or trucks even existed? The answer lies in methods that still completely blow the minds of engineers today. Step 1. They laid a massive granite-based foundation, using these enormous heavy stones to support the unbelievable weight of the structure. Step 2 involved laying tightly packed bricks, but these weren't your ordinary bricks. These clay bricks were baked in kilns for long periods to make them exceptionally durable. But Step 3 is where the real magic happened. The builders created a mortar by mixing lime with sticky rice water. Yeah, you heard that right, sticky rice. This created an ancient paste so incredibly strong that even today, sections bound by it can easily rival modern cement. It's just wild.
And beyond just the materials, the wall was a highly advanced, living military machine. Across its length, there were 20,000 to 25,000 watchtowers acting as the eyes of constant surveillance. Soldiers lived in total isolation up there, just watching the horizon for dust from approaching horses. Beneath these towers were living quarters, essentially making the wall a massive, moving military base housing millions of stationed soldiers in total. The whole thing averaged 20 to 35 feet high, and get this, it was wide enough for 10 infantry soldiers to rush to a threatened area side by side. It even featured a vast network of secret, hidden tunnels that allowed troops to move entirely undetected, a real game-changer for ancient warfare.
But that brings us to Section 5, the illusion of security.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this. With all this brilliant engineering, all those millions of stationed soldiers, and the heartbreaking sacrifice of human life, it didn't actually work. It provided an illusion of security. The ultimate irony of the Great Wall is that, despite being designed as an invincible shield, it routinely failed its primary objective. In the 13th century, Genghis Khan simply crossed it and pushed deep into China. In 1550, the Mongols breached the frontier once again. And in 1644, Manchu forces literally entered through the wall itself, which led to the total fall of the Ming Dynasty. Invaders found weak sections, they used bribery to open gates, or they simply marched right across frozen rivers in the winter. The wall slowed them down, sure, but it never actually stopped them.
Which brings us to the darker secondary purpose of this impossible structure. If it couldn't keep the enemies out, what was it really for? Well, it was a tool to control the people within. Think about it. A wall this enormous dictates exactly who passes through, where trade flows, and who can cross the border. It was a permanent, highly intimidating symbol of power. It constantly reminded the citizens that if an emperor possessed the power to carve through mountains and build a 21,000-kilometer wall, he most certainly possessed the power to bend their will. It's a really powerful reminder that throughout history, massive borders are often way less about keeping enemies out and a lot more about keeping citizens in check.
Over the centuries, the reality of the wall became wrapped up in legends, which leads to our final fascinating contrast, the space myth versus Earth reality. You have almost certainly heard the famous claim that the Great Wall was the only human-made structure visible from space with the naked eye. Well, actually, scratch that. It's entirely a myth. From orbit, the wall is so thin that without special equipment, it practically vanishes into the surrounding landscape. Its true power and its true weight has never been up in space. It has always been rooted right here, on Earth, in the soil and the stone. Today, as the unrestored sections slowly crumble and wild grass reclaims the stone, the wall outlives its builders, its kings, and even its own failures. It's evolved into a haunting monument. As our source material beautifully puts it, if you stand before it today, you will see fear, ambition, sacrifice, and the labor of millions of people whose names we may never know. Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to wrap up our explainer today. We marvel at its scale, we absolutely respect the incredible ancient engineering, but knowing that it failed to stop invasions, and knowing that 500,000 laborers were worked to death in the cold and the dust to build it, was sacrificing millions of lives to build a failed wall truly justified? It's a heavy question, but one that completely reshapes how we view history's greatest wonders. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope it gave you a whole new perspective. Catch you next time.